Sir Andrew Parmley is a bit of a big deal. Director of the Royal College of Organists, Alderman, Sherif, Knight. He was also a Lord Mayor of London. No one's asked me to be Mayor, not even once. Oh, there's a bit more room up here than in some places.
My name's Andrew Parmley and we're in the Church of St James Garlickhythe in the City of London, one of the Wren churches. I've been the organist here by mistake. I first came in January 1981 to play for one service and the organist never came back. He went off to be organist of Salisbury Cathedral. So I've been standing in now for just 4.5 decades. And what's more, I've not been paid yet, but let's not discuss that with the rector. I was at the Royal Academy of Music, 75 to 78, went back to my hometown, which is Blackpool in the northwest, where I worked as the musical director at the Pleasure Beach, the big fairground there. Got married, came down to London because my new wife had a job teaching in East London. So I was available without a church job, but a fully trained organist.
Does that mean at the Royal Academy you were studying playing the organ?
Yeah,
It was your principal instrument?
My first degree was Bachelor of Music at the Royal Academy, majoring in organ. As a 16-year-old, I became an associate of the Royal College of Organists, and at the age of 18, I became a fellow of the Royal College of Organists. Certainly, I could not possibly do that now. And now in my dotage, I'm the director of the Royal College of Organists.
So hang on, so what does that mean? What do you have to, you're saying you couldn't do it now, what do you have to do then in order to become a fellow?
So the Fellowship of the Royal College of Organists is the gold standard examination for organ playing across the world.
Oh, right.
It's a very, very tough exam and you've got to be young and alert to it. Well, actually, we had our graduation ceremony just last Saturday in Southwark Cathedral and quite a few people at my age have just managed to do it, but they must have devoted a lot of time to it.
Yeah. What kind of skills would you have to represent that you'd be looking for in a fellowship? That would happen in an exam that wouldn't perhaps happen in a lower exam?
Well, possibly uniquely in a performing examination, there's a great deal of paperwork to go with it, essays and other musical tests written on manuscript paper, which are very taxing. And when it comes to playing the instrument, not only do you have to play very difficult quality music to 3 examiners who are in the room with you, but you have to do all sorts of tests that organists might be expected to do in real life. For example, if the hymn is too high, transpose it down, but don't write it first. Just look at the notes and read it differently. And the choir's struggling, but there's no piano version of what the choir's doing, so you've got to look at 4 or more lines of music at once and put them under your fingers.
Okay.
Sight read music you've never seen before, etc. So there's a lot of very taxing things to do.
But things that relate directly to things that actually happen in a real life.
Well, I think
organist world.
I think increasingly, possibly, the tests are unrelated to reality, except in cathedrals, where this happens all the time. But in reality, you would look at a hymn in advance and think that's going to be too high. I'll put it down and I'll just work that out in my mind before I do it. You know.
Oh, so you'd have a moment's preparation in it.
Yeah. But we used to call these tests sudden death. You know, in fact, for years, when the candidate was sitting at the console, I was the person who stood next to that person, pulled out the stops and say, play it down a tone, play it up a semitone or whatever. So,
but it's kind of aimed at those high-level performance spaces like cathedrals and I guess.
It's the passport to a good job in organ playing. By and large, we have similar examinations in the Americas where we've got the American Guild of Organists looking after US, etc., and the Royal Canadian College of Organists looking after the northern part. We're the 3 big organ organisations in the world, and the Royal College of Organists, my unit, convenes the others. So we have regular Zoom meetings with our friends across, and I write not only RCO News, Royal College of Organists News, which goes to our membership, but also RCO Transatlantic, which goes to our members overseas.
On the exam, just the written part, what sort of thing might you have to write about?
Well, for example, I think one of the areas of study is a lady composer called Cecilia McDowell, who's written a lot of organ music, and so the student would study all of her music and try and understand what she's trying to achieve. Another question might be organ music written in Germany between 1650 and 1700, sort of mug up on all that stuff. We don't get involved in how does this work, because that's the Institute of Organ Builders department.
Okay, that's a different one. Okay.
Yeah, it's like I drive a car, but I have no idea what's under the bonnet.
How true, yes. You're not only senior in the organ world, you're also a Lord Mayor of London.
Well, it's true, yes, I won't deny it. I was the 689th Lord Mayor of London, which is quite an unusual thing for a musician from the north, because most of the other nearly 700 Lord Mayors now have been bankers, accountants or lawyers from the southeast.
Yes.
But my life has been a series of misfortune and mistake, through all based on playing this organ, to be honest. As a result of being here for about 10 years, so we're now in the early 90s, I took one of the church wardens at the time for dinner in Cambridge, and I was driving him back down the motorway, and he said, have you ever considered joining the Common Council? I said, I've never heard of Common Council, which is the local authority for the square mile, the oldest continuous municipal local authority in the world. In fact, the House of Commons and the House of Lords is based on us, not the other way around. Just trying to score that point. Two big differences. One is we are much smaller than government,
yes.
And also we're not political, which makes us very interesting. A very interesting body. Anyway, I joined Common Council. I worked there for 10 years, unpaid. All my life seems to be unpaid, and I chaired the Girls' School and the Barbican. I chaired the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and I was very happy being a councillor. When the Alderman for this ward, Alderman being the upper house equivalent of the House of Lords, right? So there are 25 electoral units, 25 aldermen, one for each ward. My Alderman said some 20 odd years ago he had to retire and I should stand. And I didn't wish to do that, but to keep him happy, eventually I did. And there was one other person standing for this ward of Vintry, and that was a lovely man called Andrew Skinner, who died the day before the election. Apparently the knife had my initials on it, but they never pinned it on me. Anyway, I shouldn't joke about that. I shouldn't joke about that. So I phoned the town clerk up at Guildhall. I said, well, we better call this off. And he said, no, there's one vacancy and one candidate. So tomorrow the Lord Mayor will declare you to be the new Alderman for Vintry Ward.
Right.
Yet another mistake. Mistake playing this organ. Mistake joining Common Council.
You're not telling me you wiped out a mayor to become mayor?
But no, I didn't. Right, to become mayor, you've got to keep your seat as the alderman, which I've done for over 20 years.
And it's an elected position under
Elected
normal
by the
circumstances.
local elections.
They're not political. How does that work?
Allegedly, we're all independent. There's a tendency increasingly for some members to belong to a party, but in the city we're supposed to be independent. Okay. And part of our job is to hold the government to account where we can. So if we were Tory or Labour and the opposite party was in down the road, it would be more tricky. So we try to be fair to everybody in Westminster. And we're very friendly with Whitehall, with Downing Street, etc. But we're a different entity.
Yeah. And
it used to be said years ago that the city of London raises the money and the city of Westminster spends it. You self-select to go forward for Sherif, so I was successful in becoming Sherif of London and lived at the Old Bailey for 12 months. And if you, one of the jobs of the sheriffs is to look after the judges these days. So if you're still an alderman and you have been sheriff, you can be in nomination to be Lord Mayor. And lo and behold, 2016 I became the 689th Lord Mayor, which is enormous fun. People often think mayors, they open supermarkets and kiss babies.
Yes.
The Lord Mayor of London is a financial services international ambassador for the government and the country. I spent 100 days abroad in 30 countries, gave probably 250 telly and radio interviews, 900 speeches, although my wife always says it was one speech 900 times. And in the square mile, on a very bad day, they mentioned how staff might book the Lord Mayor out for 20 meetings. You never catch breath between.
It's a full-time job. It's not.
It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
It's the greatest unpaid job in the world.
And how long do you do it for?
Just 12 months.
Okay.
You start the day before the Lord Mayor.
So just a minute. It's another unpaid job.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But what a privilege. And I was very fortunate to be knighted by the Queen soon afterwards. Certainly I didn't go into it for that, but it's a nice reward for doing the job. And no one was more shocked than I was when I got a letter saying, if you were offered a knighthood, would you accept it? I mean, you think about that.
Are you the only musician to have ever held the post?
There are a lot of banking Lord Mayors have been very keen
who are musical.
musicians. Yeah.
But you're primarily a musician, would you say that, or would you say you have another profession that you're
Education.
education?
So the knighthood actually was given, it's for services to.
Yes.
Mine is for services to music, education and civic engagement.
Okay.
Quite a mouthful. Yeah. Do you want to know about this thing?
Not only have you been playing this for many years, but you are instrumental in fixing it.
Yeah, I decided quite early on. It was in a very poor state.
Yeah.
I mean, it dates back. Some people say it's 1697. It's more likely to be 1718. It's still a very long time ago.
Yes.
And wear and tear. But you have to bear in mind when this was built, the organ and the clock were the height of technology in any town. This is a very difficult bit
It was
of
the iPhone of its time.
Exactly. And when I look inside, I'm mesmerised by how complex the mechanism is because it's entirely mechanical. Inside there, I don't know how many pipes there are, maybe 2,000 or 3,000. People often think it's only the pipes you can see on the front, but actually there are mountains of them back there.
There's nothing physical left from that time.
Well, yeah, a lot of these pipes will be original. But the paper trail are the minutes of vestry meetings and all that sort of stuff, of which there are mountains. People meticulously wrote down everything that happened and what they paid for it and who they hired to be the organist and who they sacked and all that stuff. And all those records are maintained in Guildhall now. But also when you look at the pipes, it was the habit of organ builders, probably still is, to put various marks on to demonstrate who made it and which note it's supposed to sing when you press the note and all that stuff. So there's quite a lot of documentary evidence scratched onto the pipes around the back.
There's actual physical evidence in there that's still there today that you could look at.
Well, I think so. I think this chap Noppel,
Yes.
who built it in 1718, was an apprentice to the man called Father Smith, who's one of the big names in that period.
Yes.
And I think it wasn't uncommon for people to borrow pipes. And it's got some interesting marks on it. For example, just here on the music desk,
Yes.
it says E. Cross Frith, organist. That's actually 1793. The bottom of the wood was cut off some time ago. So Mr. Frith decided he would announced the date that he started playing the organ here, 1793. And there's another
So really that's graffiti.
It is graffiti.
It's beautifully written graffiti.
And there's another one here. I think it says FR 1808 to 1809.
That's lovely.
And of course, years ago, it would be lit not by beautiful electric lighting, but by candle. And one of my predecessors closed the doors before he blew the candle out. So we've got the flame marks still. But the case will be contemporary.
So it will be 17. So what year did you say?
1718 is the best date. 1718 is the best. It's a wonderful case. I mean, if you look at it, it's got this great height to it. It's got 4 towers and then 3 sections, but each in 2 parts. Now, interestingly, above the middle part, there's a round section, and they are just wooden pipes. They're just dummies. There was a theory that used to be a clock face, and there's also a theory that the clock that's on the outside wall used to drive that with a mechanism coming straight through the church. And right at the top of it, a golden shell, which is the symbol of St. James of Compostela. And what I'm particularly proud of is there are 2 angels up there playing golden trumpets. And when we restored the organ in 2007, I was convinced those trumpets would have been gold originally, but I couldn't find any evidence. Lo and behold, I found a document dated 1815 when somebody proposed the angels' trumpets be re-gilded. That's enough for me, so we gilded the trumpets.
Okay, so when you say gold, it's not solid gold. For a moment, though, I was
Oh, no.
no, but it's gilded. So.
Well, the pipes here,
the pipes.
that's gold leaf actually. Well, first of all, he painted it with some sort of red paint underneath before he put the gold leaf on. And if you come in here at the dead of night, as I sometimes do, it glows of its own accord. It's the most beautiful thing.
Really?
Yeah. And when it was first reopened, if I used the pipes at the front, I used to get a shower of gold leaf in my hair because it blew it out. Beautiful little cherubs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really, really stunning woodwork.
So if we just go around the side here, if you look in there, there's some very dark wood. Now, when I inherited this organ, the whole thing was that colour, but the whole thing was black, but very uneven black. And one theory for that is that when Victoria died, Queen Victoria, as a sign of respect, every church and every public building had to disguise something in black as mourning. So it was felt that the organ was probably dabbed all over with ox blood to make it a memorial to Victoria, maybe apocryphal. Well, every organ is different.
Yeah.
That's the starting point, isn't it? This one is a typical of its age. It only developed the pedals in 1888. So before that time, it had the three motors, probably two originally, then another one added, and then pedals much later, because English organists didn't use their feet. Unlike the Northern European, with the tradition of Bach and his contemporaries, very extravagant things for your feet. But English organists didn't do that. In fact, when the pedal board was first introduced on the cathedral organ at St Paul's, the organist of the day said he'd never played a gridiron and he wasn't about to start now. This is the sort of piece and the sort of sound for which the instrument would have been built. So during church services of the day, the organist would have three opportunities to do a bit of showing off. Before it started, probably to play the clergy in, at the end to play them out. And usually somewhere in the middle, another little piece. This is an organ voluntary. The voluntary was a particularly English device, and usually in several sections. This little piece is only in two sections. It's actually by an English composer called William Boyce. Why I particularly wanted to play this little piece for you is that William Boyce was born in a street that's just behind the church there. His father was the beadle to the Worship Company of Joiners, and William Boyce was baptised in the font which is just behind you downstairs. So it's very much
strong connections.
very strong connection with this place. And this is a typical sound from when the organ was built. In fact, I think Boyce was born around about 1711. If this was installed 1718, it's exactly the right sort of thing. So as you can see, no feet.
I was going to say, I was thinking, is there going to be any feet engagement at all? But no, there was absolutely
no period. They wouldn't have used the feet at all. But multiple keyboards allowed them to develop these echo techniques. So it's quite nice. And the last one you can see sounds like it's a long way away.
Yes.
But that's because the pipes related to the top keyboard are in a huge box back there with Venetian blinds on the front. So if I close the box, as we would put it, then gradually open it using this thing, you can see it gets gradually louder, and then I can make it fade away again. Well, that's the swell pedal. Now
it's a swell pedal,
yeah,
okay.
On a modern organ, it would be a big toe thing here in the middle, like a car pedal, and it would be balanced, which is to say, wherever you leave it, when you take your foot off, it would stay there. But this one isn't. This is on a ratchet. So if I'm not going to leave my foot on it, it's either closed, half open, or fully open.
Yeah.
Certainly, this is one of the earliest English organs to have as well. And it's quite an interesting thing. I mean, when we get into the Victorian era, they introduced this sound, which is a beautiful little gentle sound, supposed to emulate the sounds of violins and such things. So it sort of undulates. It's slightly wobbling, and that's because.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll put it back. That stop is perfectly in tune. This one is a tiny bit out of tune. And put them together, it creates that vibration.
So the interference between the two gives you that. Let me listen.
Then you might bring in some. I'll show you some feeds.
Yeah.
This is sort of doodling that organists play while they're waiting for the vicar to arrive.
That's low.
Now it is, that's the lowest note I've got. And because the pedals were added later, there was not a lot of room for the pipes that go with the pedals, so they tend to be enormous. The biggest one is 16 feet long. So the numbers make it mean something. There are only two pedal stops on this organ, in effect, a smallish one and a bigger one. So there's not a lot of strength down there. But if you are going to play a hymn, you might be playing Praise My Soul of Heaven, Kings of Heaven. Now, if I just played that with the pedals and there's not a lot of sound coming from the bass. Just a deep rumble.
Yes.
So what I can do is pull out this stop, which is called grate, to pedal. And now whatever I do with my feet, is also drawing down the notes here, and it actually does it physically.
So you're getting that lovely magic magic piano effect as,
Yeah,
as the
exactly.
notes down here.
Exactly. Well, you can couple. You can do the same thing with all three keyboards, which looks a little bit crazy, but now we've got three keyboards playing together. So.
But if I look at those three different lengths,
Yes.
which are indicating the octave, but they've also got different
Well, they have-
words written
exactly,
on.
exactly. So, in broad terms, there are four families of stops. Diapason is the basic organ sound, that sound, and that's where we started the voluntary a minute ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's true organ sound, if you like. Related to the diapason would be the principal and the 15th. You can see there's a blend. Then we have stops that sound like flutes. Quite nice. And they can come in different lengths as well. So down here on the choir, I've got an 8-foot, a 4-foot, and a 2-foot.
How do you know that those stops only relate to that keyboard?
Well, that's an interesting question. On a modern organ, there would be little signs above the stops saying which keyboard they pertain to. And when I first came here, there were little signs. There was a sign there said choir, a sign there said great, a sign there said swell, and a little one in there for these two that said pedal. But they wouldn't have been original. When we restored the instrument, they had to go because they're not part of the original deal.
Yeah.
And there are some other interesting stops on the organ, which were taken away a long, long time ago, and I wanted to put them back on. But the heritage people said, well, you can have those stops back, but we're taking away the pedals, because when those stops were there, the pedals weren't. So you're having pedals or you're having the stops that have gone. So I took the decision to put the pedals in because we have to accompany choirs and congregations, and those things are very useful to us.
Okay. And then as I'm looking at the bottom of these stops, they're in red.
The red ones don't make a noise on their own, but they're what we call couplers. So swell to great means that if I am playing on the great, I'm getting the swell coming down as well. Same technique as we just saw with the pedals. And there's one slightly different one here. Let me find this, which is called swell octave. And if I pull that out, it plays the octave above at the same time.
Oh, I don't think I've seen that before.
Well, you will have seen
and it only does it on
It
the
only-
top keyboard.
Only does it on top keyboard. It's not very effective. The notes don't always go all the way down, as you can see. And it makes it very, very heavy. This is a particularly heavy organ because it's a mechanical action and it's of its age. But when I do that, by a series of mechanical means, I'm actually opening the bottom of a pipe somewhere in there.
Okay, and in this restored organ, it's not going back to an electrical system. It's going back to it's mechanical end to end.
It's
no fly by wire.
There's no electronic action. The mechanism is called the action. There's nothing electronic. Bizarrely, the pedals were originally, it's called tracker when it's done by levers. Pedals were originally tracker, but they were then replaced with something called tubular neumatic, which means they can speak slightly slower than the hands because the pipe is opened by a gust of wind going through lots of little pipes inside it, which is not as accurate or immediate as the tracker system.
So the foot pedals which arrived after the main instrument effectively used an inferior technology, or is it wrong to call it inferior, just different?
It was probably state of the art the day they did
time.
it, and it's not stood the test of time really. But because it has to be an historic restoration in 2007, they were tubular pneumatic, and they're still tubular pneumatic.
And that means you need to slightly lead when you're playing.
Yeah, after 40 years, I've got used to playing faster with my feet, or in advance with my feet. Than
And does it ruin you for other instruments when you do?
I go play another instrument. I'm hopeless. And the other, the other bizarre thing is, the pedal board is enormous. I don't know if you can spot that, but a modern pedal board would be much smaller. Now, this was made bespoke in 2007.
Yeah.
But it was said that is what the pedal board would have looked like in 1888 when it was first introduced.
all of the early stuff was on the single keyboard.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you introduced the
So-
other keyboards. And I just want to see, is there something that's marked on the music that make you know? And also, and you reached over and opened a load of stops, and I assume that actually you had to do that in situ because you were trying to get a different sound. You couldn't have started off with that.
Well, no, a modern organ would have a series of little buttons down here,
Yeah.
pistons, and you could push them in instantly. The whole thing can change.
Yeah.
So it says at the start diapasons, so hence we've got the great diapasons. When we get to the second section, it says above the right hand trumpet, which is there, and underneath it soft organ. But also it says echo or swell. So I've got to set up the swell stops to be the echo of the trumpet. I've got to use the choir for the soft organ, and I've also got to use the middle keyboard for trumpet, but it has been the diapasons, so that's just the hiatus. So when we got to the end of the first section, and from the punter's point of view downstairs, they probably don't even notice that you've...
No, you're doing it in musical time. I mean, you have to go real fast.
You've got to know where they are.
Yeah.
Highly prestigious jobs were had in the city, and many of the city organists were very famous people. In fact, on one occasion, Henry Purcell, the great English composer's son, Edward, auditioned to be organist here, and he didn't pass the audition.
Purcell?
Yeah, Henry's son, Edward.
Oh, his son, okay.
Purcell,
I don't know how good Henry, that Purcell's son was. So,
the PCC who went up didn't like him much, so that was that. And they were sought after positions, but of course, at the time the organ was built, the organist's salary might be £20 a year, not enough to live on and make up a family. So many of them were known as pluralist musicians. They audition for several jobs and quite often get several jobs. But of course you can't be in 4 churches on a Sunday morning, so they'd send students but keep most of the money.
Okay.
The other curious thing about this church is that...
but I think that's music. You always make... People have portmanteau careers in
you got to, haven't you?
Even today.
And one of the additional jobs of the organist here was to look after the charity children. And we used to, I don't know if there was an orphanage in this part of town, but the children used to be brought to church on a Sunday morning and they had to sing. And originally they were put downstairs, but they must have caused quite a disturbance. So eventually the church wardens arranged for pews to be built either side of the organ, and they're noticeably too narrow for an adult, and basically the illegitimate children of the city would be sitting there, and part of the organist's job was to train them in music and get them to sing. And I think they had to post the beadle and somebody else up here to make sure that they sort of behaved. But we have the oldest baptismal registers in the country at this church, 1535. So
Survived the Great Fire and...
Well, everything, all the interesting artifacts are now kept in Guildhall. This first one is what's known as a chorale prelude, the chorale being the German word for hymn. And whereas in England today, if we're going to have a hymn, the organist would play a bit of the tune first to remind the congregation what it sounds like. But in Bach's time, the organist would usually improvise a variation on the hymn. So it's not necessarily just the notes of the hymn, but actually something surrounding it. Bach wrote many chorale preludes, and each one is ingeniously very different. But this one's for the season that we're in. And I wanted to show you one other characteristic of it. We spoke about the diapasons and the flutes. There are 2 other sounds that the organ can make. One is notes that are not directly an octave apart, but they're sometimes a different interval apart. For example, so when I pull that note out, it's actually playing that one. So that's playing an octave and a 12th. And that sounds like a crazy thing to do. But if you do it in a context of a rich chord and then add the extra note, it just gives it a bit more texture. Very slight.
So you're in the same chord, but you're giving a little bit more.
Bit more emphasis on one note.
And it's giving you another finger.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that right?
Well, not really, but it's principles, right? And things called mixtures. This one plays more than one pipe at a time. This one plays 2 ranks, two notes at a time. If I do it down there. And it just adds sparkle at the top end. This one actually has 4 pipes for every note. So that's quite a quite a rich sound,
Okay, what's that one called?
which is just another mixture. It's called sesquialto.
Okay, but it's called mixture.
It's a mixture, so 4 ranks, 4 pipes at the same time. The last sound I wanted to draw your attention to are what we call reeds, and reeds are either on the big side, sort of trumpety. I've got an 8-foot one and a 4-foot one, so you can get quite a good noise. And then you get more gentle ones. This is supposed to sound a bit like a clarinet. Sort of.
Well,
sort of
it does,
yeah.
yeah.
And this one is what it says on the tin, oboe. And that's the one I'm going to use in the piece I want to play for you. But what I wanted to show you was that we've got very few artificial devices for enhancing the sound, but this organ's got an original tremulant, and that makes the air pressure vibrate inside it, and hence the note vibrates. So there's the straight note, and here with the tremulant, isn't that extraordinary?
And it's very, very pronounced.
And that's the technique of the Wurlitzer organ, the cinema organ. They have the tremulant on every keyboard all the time. That's the characteristic sound.
So Bach would have known about the tremulant and would have specified that, or
no,
or you're in the style, or this is a way of doing it.
He would have had one, but very rarely does Bach specify what music he wants, what settings he wants. But he does say, this is original, deux claves et ped, which is to say, he means it to be for 2 keyboards and pedals.
Okay.
And this is written, of course, a long time before this organ
Had pedals.
Had pedals, yeah. I can give you titles and what have you if you like. So one of the other big things that Bach's famous for are what we call preludes and fugues, a two-part piece of music. One, a sort of freestyle, sometimes Fantasia style composition, and then a fugue. What I'm going to do is play you the first part of his F minor prelude and fugue, so just the prelude, but it will show you a typical how we can recreate the typical sound that Bach might have heard by using the diapason chorus there on very limited pedals, but using on a Bach organ the pedals would have had as many stops as the other sections, but we've just got a few. So I'm using the swell stops as if they were part of the pedal division. So instead of just the woolly sound, we should get a bit more definition down there and a touch of reed. So that's what we call Baroque music from,
Yes.
from Bach's period.
Yes.
And we've had a similar age piece from the English repertoire. But organists are nowadays called upon to play music from every generation, even though the instrument itself is in aspic. It's from a time, and it's not particularly suited to other periods. But I wanted to play a piece of romantic music to show how you can play pieces from different eras on an instrument which perhaps it's some people would think it's not the right thing to do even, but you know it works.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and the number of times one is asked to play, I don't know, the Vidor toccata at a wedding, you know, stuff. When this was built, that would have, people just wouldn't have comprehended what that was about, you know. It's just an alien sound. So it's extraordinary. Now this is a piece by a chap called Karg Eilert, which wasn't his real name. He changed his name several times, and in fact, he's got at least 3 dates of birth, so he's a bit of a mysterious character. This is like the little piece of Bach I played a moment ago, based on a hymn tune. He did a similar thing, but in the Romantic period. And so this piece also explores all the keyboards. And it's called antiphon because the sections of it are like echoes, as we've discovered in the English piece earlier where we had the echo trumpet. So you'll see me darting between keyboards. This one calls for sudden changes of volume, so FF very loud, and then suddenly you've got a P and a PP very soft.
Oh, so that would be a button press on a more modern organ.
You could do, or lots more of it would be in boxes, and you could close the shutters. And similarly, this sort of hairpin shape shows that you're supposed to gradually open the box, but you can't do because you did something else.
Yeah.
So this is written for a different machine.
The physicality of what you just achieved there was amazing. You know,
It was nearly accurate as well at the time.